When a country is invaded, like Vietnam was, it's natural that the invaded country is more motivated to defend its land. I think it's safe to assume the same would apply during an invasion of the US.
I think I would disagree in that aspect. I know Americans don't like hearing this, but I don't think you have as many patriotic people as you think. In this video, we'll be checking out the full might of the American military machine. This is the kind of video that enemies of the United States would really hate. They won't like this kind of video. Let's get right into it.
Look at this chart. It compares military budgets of countries, but it's a bit different because it doesn't compare one country's military spending to another, but instead compares the US's military spending with the cumulative total of the 9 other
No. I was just looking at it, I was like, what kind of chart is this? No, this can't be. This cannot be. This is embarrassing. This is embarrassing. Absolutely embarrassing. I don't even know what to say about this. This is absolutely embarrassing. Seriously. Wow.
country's military spending were all on the top 10 list of biggest spenders. The reason? Well, the United States spent over $800 billion on its military in 2021, thus outspending South Korea, Japan, Saudi Arabia, Germany, France, Russia, the UK, India, and China combined. So there's frankly no worthwhile comparison to be made here. Yet still, after fighting wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and after a trade war with China, as well as unfriendly relations with Iran and North Korea, the US has its fair share of enemies who undoubtedly want to hurt them in one way, shape, or form. So, hypothetically speaking, despite such a well-equipped military, could an enemy ever successfully invade the US or make devastating damages to the nation in some?
The only thing that can happen is cause political unrest. Like, for example, what happened to Donald Trump, for example? Let's say that was the planned assassination by the US enemies, you know, to cause a civil war. That is the only thing, you know. I think that's the only way the enemies of the US can actually take down the US now, outside of nuclear war, which that is mutually assured destruction. That is the end of it. But in terms of like a kind of war that the enemy country will still be whole while the US will be destroyed, it has to come from within. It has to come from within. I think that is the only way. And I think I wouldn't be surprised if those seeds have already been planted. I wouldn't be surprised one bit.
Way. Well, as it turns out, this question was a bit harder to answer than I initially planned, because the military is only one of the reasons why the US is so unconquerable. You see, the US is in an incredible position, geographically, and its secret weapon might therefore be its location. All you have to do is look at this map to understand why. For over 150 years, America's territory has stretched all the way across the continent from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean. These huge coasts separate the US from any potential enemy, so even in wartime, the American mainland is very well protected. Take World War II for example, when America fought in both Europe and Asia at the same time. Barely any attacks happened on US soil during the entire war. That meant American factories could keep making planes and weapons without interruptions, unlike the constantly bombed Soviet and British factories. On top of that, the Defense Production Act allowed the president to allocate materials and facilities for national defense, direct companies to prioritize government orders, and offer loans to companies to make this happen fast. In 2020, this law was used to increase the production of ventilators and medical-grade masks. So clearly, it's a very useful law to have in the toolbox, since the US still has a domestic industrial base with major shipyards, aviation, and automotive factories. A wartime scenario could easily involve switching to wartime production, so this makes sense. Not to mention the existing military industry, which is already making tanks, planes, weapons, and warships for the US military. Factories on US soil are a huge advantage, because the US military can protect its supply chain simply by defending its own territory. Very little has to come from outside compared to its enemies, who would need to constantly run supplies across an entire ocean. I mean, just look at the size of the Atlantic Ocean and the even bigger Pacific to get an idea of just how long enemy supply chains chains would have to be. Not to mention the fact that with today's satellites, it would be trivially easy to spot an invasion coming from thousands of miles away and take out enemy shipments before they ever reached the US coast. Supply lines are critical in any war, and the US military is well known for its excellent logistics capabilities. They have the added advantage of the 45,000-mile highway system, which was designed with troop movements in mind. On top of that, the US has 140,000 miles of freight railway infrastructure. Now sure, this can be a double-edged sword, as enemies could use this infrastructure to penetrate into America's heartland. And infrastructure could definitely be a weak point, if not properly guarded. A good example of this would be this pipeline that runs over 5,500 miles from Texas to New Jersey and carries nearly 45% of the East Coast's fuel supply. In May 2021, a cyber attack shut down the pipeline for 5 days, and this isn't a fluke either. China and Russia both support cybercrime groups that regularly attack government agencies and companies. The former head lawyer for the NSA, Stuart Baker, told the Washington Post, quote, "We're fighting the cyber equivalent of a land war in Asia every day. But America's infrastructure is more than just highways and internet cables. Back in the day, another kind of highway already connected the Midwest from north to south, the Mississippi River, and the connected Missouri River is the 4th longest river system in the world." So yeah, this river has always been crucial to connecting the economies of major cities, like New Orleans, Minneapolis, and St. Louis. Today, the river is still used to ship goods across America. So during an invasion, the Mississippi could likely help move troops and weapons too. What's impressive about the US's geography is how challenging it makes the US to conquer, and that might have to do with the diversity of terrains like deserts, swamps, and mountains. The Appalachian Mountains in the east and the Rocky Mountains in the west serve as major barriers to inland invasion, and the Great Lakes in the northeast form yet another barrier. The result is that the flatter areas along the southern border seem like the best entry point. But the US compensates for these weaknesses with huge numbers of troops stationed in California and Texas. The coasts aren't any easier to invade with hundreds of thousands of troops stationed in military bases. Not to mention the fact that the US has peaceful relations with its neighbors to the north and south, which both have smaller populations.
I won't really say it's peaceful relation. I think it's more of landlord and tenant relation.
And militaries if any turmoil was to unfold. To the east and west, the US has no neighbors as previously discussed, a fact which has led America to focus on other things instead of imminent invasions. On top of that, the NATO treaty requires European and Canadian allies to come to America's defense if it's ever attacked. Oh yeah, and in addition to its current military personnel, the US still maintains the selective service system. See, all males from 18 to 25 have to sign up for a lottery to be drafted in the case of a national emergency. During the height of World War II, the US drafted over 3 million men per year, so this system could potentially expand the US's military personnel by several million. And we're not even done yet, because besides all this, an invasion is still very unlikely for another reason: the Pentagon's unrivaled resources. As I mentioned in the beginning, the US's defense budget is unrivaled. The US spent almost 3 times as much as China in 2021 and 10 times more than Russia. The result is that no country has enough ships or planes to get past the US forces. According to one military expert, quote, "The amphibious assault capability of the combined militaries of the world are simply too insignificant to get a beachhead on a coast." And then we of course have the civilians, who have even more guns than the military. So maybe armed citizens could also join the fight against invaders. I mean, it's a possibility. But anyway. Urban warfare presents more challenges than fighting in open combat and often gives an advantage to the country defending its own territory. We only have to look at Russia's failed invasion of Kiev for proof of this factor. While urban areas make up a small amount of US territory, any invader would have to take control of cities to conquer the country, since 82% of the population lives in these cities. Another advantage of armies defending their own country from invasion is the will to fight. According to the RAND Corporation, a think tank closely tied to the Pentagon, will to fight means the disposition and decision to fight, to keep fighting, and to win. The report highlights the time's will to fight was emphasized in US military doctrine, demonstrating just how vital it is to military victories. You can clearly see how that influenced the outcome of World War II and the Vietnam War. When a country is invaded, like Vietnam was, it's natural that the invaded country is more motivated to defend its land. I think it's safe to assume the same would apply during an invasion of the US. But let's shift gears for a bit and discuss.
I think I would disagree in that aspect. I know Americans don't like hearing this, but I don't think you have as many patriotic people as you think. I just don't think so. People just assume that if invasion happens, everybody will just, go to default mode and like, oh, we are now Americans. No, there are lots of people that live in your country that hate your country. And there are also lots of people that are in your countries that have families in different countries, that if the war gets very horrible, they would rather get on a plane or a boat or whatever and run back to their parents' country than stay and defend the United States. I can assure you that. That is just the reality. I don't mean to call out people that I know personally, but I can tell you that lots of them, if a real invasion were to happen and they have the chance to move immediately, like I'm not talking about, there'll be a point where the government will bar people from traveling. That will definitely happen so that they won't run away. But let me just say the first 1 or 2 days, 24, 48 hours, I'm telling you, people are getting on a plane and running back to their parents' countries, including our politicians, who some of them also have relations in other countries as well. So I'm just saying, I don't think people always bring up the World War II time. I don't think the US population is as patriotic as the population during World War II. I just don't think so.
One enormous US advantage I haven't mentioned, which is self-reliance for its food, energy and weapons needs. Take these green areas for example. This land is mostly used for agriculture since only 2% of America's land is in urban areas. This low-lying land is a major reason why the US is nearly self-sufficient in agriculture and even exports food to many countries around the world. It also explains why America now actually has the most arable land in the world. That's right, the US has more arable land than India and China. What's more surprising is that India is only a third the size of the US, and China is slightly smaller but can only sustain large populations near its east coast. The crazy thing is that both of those countries have over 1.3 billion people, or about 1 billion more than the US population. And since the US is only projected to grow by another 100 million people over the next century, the US likely has enough resources to support a billion-plus population, but they don't need to. As for energy, the US also has impressive amounts of petroleum and gas, especially in parts of Texas. It has around 44 billion barrels of proved crude oil reserves and almost 500 trillion cubic feet of natural gas reserves. In fact, when you include biofuels...
Man, look at that. That is crazy. I think that is why some people in Texas feel like the craziness that goes on in some of these coastal cities, some of the craziness that they don't agree with, that they would like to divide from the United States. And I think if Texas decides to do that, I do believe that they can. From what I've seen, lots of military bases are in Texas. And I think, I don't really know. Because for it to separate from the Union, there will be a war. And I don't think Texas can win that war against the rest of the United States. Now, it now depends how many states join Texas. Would it turn to a Republican versus Democrats? And that's why I was saying that Trump assassination attempt was very, very dangerous, because the US is in a tipping balance right now. If you guys are not aware, you are in a tipping balance right now. All it takes is just a little push right now. And that is why I'm actually surprised that some of America's enemies haven't made moves. I'm not talking about this cyber, no. I'm talking about the one that you cause a civil war. That is what they should do. I'm not saying that they should do it. I'm just saying, logically, that is what they should do. Because that's the easiest way to destroy the United States. I don't think cyber warfare and any other thing is going to be able to, like, the US are so sophisticated right now so powerful in terms of infrastructure. Like, it's crazy. Technology. Like, these other countries can't compete. Like, there's nothing. All this bravado that Putin is doing all over the place. It's just outside of nuclear weapons. He can't do anything to the United States. Like, outside of nuclear bombs. Same thing with the rest of them. The US can take on all those countries. All of them at once. If nuclear war is not involved. So it's not really necessary like that. However, in a civil war, that is how the US can be destroyed. That is how they can be destroyed. And I don't know, Sha. I'm just saying. I'm not saying it should happen, but I'm just saying.
The US could be considered the largest oil producer in the world. It seems like even the bad parts of US geography have a major silver lining. The Appalachian Mountains on the east coast that I mentioned earlier aren't suited for farming, but they do have huge coal deposits that have been exploited for decades. And surprisingly, at least to me, America has the world's largest coal reserves and loads of other natural resources from energy to metals. But to share a bit of a weakness of the US, it turns out it doesn't have every metal it needs to defend itself. You see, this shiny looking rock is a mineral called antimony, and is critical for making bullets and other weapons, and even night vision goggles. While antimony played an important role in World War II ammunition production, the last mine in the US closed in 1997. The US is therefore reliant on China and Russia, its two biggest military rivals, for supply of this critical mineral. So the US does have weaknesses, but
by the way, Russia does have everything. That's like the US has almost everything except apparently this antimony that I didn't even know about. But apparently, because from what I knew, Russia had everything, and they also have this antimony as well. I mean, that is just ridiculous at this point. Russia is so blessed. I don't know. I think corruption is part of the reason why the country has not blossom to the point that they should be. I know that I say like a world power, but I think they would have been in a situation where they would be the undisputed superpower of the world. But unfortunately, corruption with all these oligarchs embezzling money, they're almost like Nigerian politicians, seriously. Just stealing money, embezzling money all over the place, instead of actually helping improve the country to a point where they are unstoppable. Because they have everything. They have everything.
Who could actually have the military might and, most importantly, motivation to try and invade the US?
Nobody.
Well, the latest US defense strategy names the People's Republic of China as the US's most consequential strategic competitor, and notes that Russia poses acute threats. Beyond these two big threats, it also mentions North Korea and Iran. But let's focus on China for a bit. It's true that China is slowly building up its military capabilities, but it isn't even ready to launch an invasion on the island of Taiwan, let alone the west coast of the United States. I don't think I even need to mention how the loss of its largest trading partner would devastate the Chinese economy. Still, there's some reason for concern. If China disabled American satellites, it could debilitate the US military's ability to monitor troop movements in real time. If you're thinking this sounds like science fiction though, you'd be wrong, because in 2007, China successfully destroyed one of its own satellites with a ballistic missile. Floating 850 kilometers above the Earth, the destroyed satellite is at a similar altitude to US intelligence satellites, so China could theoretically destroy them too. In terms of Russia, well, they have now performed a similar test, which endangered the crew of the ISS. Taking out satellites is a bit extreme though, because it causes hazardous space debris that would affect all current and future satellites. That includes Russia's and China's satellites. But Russia and China are already interfering with US satellites on a daily basis. They're just using lasers and jammers instead of trying to shoot them down. What's even scarier though is China's recent investments in AI and quantum computing, which could change the future of warfare. I mean, imagine how hard it would be for the Pentagon to strategize against an enemy using an AI supercomputer to calculate decisions in milliseconds. But if we look at Russia again for a second, their military has turned out to be much more disorganized and incompetent than we imagined before their invasion of Ukraine in early 2022. Still, they're definitely a force to be reckoned with nearly 1 million troops troops, thousands of vehicles, and specialized hacker units. As for other potential attackers, North Korea, for example, may boast that their nuclear weapons can reach the US mainland, but owing to their low budget and antique equipment, there's no way they could invade the entire US. Iran is a similar story, except that they don't yet have a nuclear warhead, although they're not far off. Realistically speaking, both countries use nukes to preserve the regime rather than actually use them against their enemies. Cuba and Venezuela are two other enemy nations in the US's backyard, but their troop numbers and military budgets are hardly enough to invade the United States. And if all else fails to stop an invasion, we shouldn't forget that America is a nuclear-armed nation itself.
I didn't even have any idea that Venezuela was an enemy of the US. So if that is the case, what stops the government in sending some bad actors through the border, since the US apparently feel like protecting the border is racist or xenophobic? What stops the Venezuelan government from sending bad actors through that border? What stops them?
It has a triad of air, land, and sea missiles, which make it impossible to take out entirely. Land missiles are stored in the center of the country, and the sea missiles are in submarines, which are constantly on the move, hidden away without a blip on the radar. Since the Cold War though, nuclear weapons have acted more as a deterrent rather than a direct threat. You see, the principle of mutually assured destruction essentially means anyone who uses a nuke will get nuked back, launching a chain reaction of nuclear warfare, eventually obliterating Earth and ending humanity. But just for fun, let's compare nuclear arsenals. Alright, so the US and Russia currently have around 5,000 nukes, with around 1,500 deployed at heavy bomber bases and on intercontinental missiles. And then we of course have China. It has a couple hundred nuclear weapons, but none of them are deployed. Now, these numbers might seem high, since they can literally eradicate humanity, but this is actually a low point from the peak of 70,000 nukes worldwide in the mid-1980s. What's still quite worrying though is that while the US claims to have decommissioned over 11,000 nuclear warheads since 1994, China and Russia are thought to be increasing their stockpile. But despite this, I hope you can see how costly it would be to even attempt an invasion of the US. Any hypothetical invasion would have to overcome the US's huge military and geographical advantages to gain any ground. While it is plausible that a major state actor like China or Russia could take out satellites and hack critical infrastructure, they'd also have to contend with the millions of well-equipped troops on the ground and a hostile armed population. So realistically, a physical invasion isn't really a possibility, but what if America's enemies—
It's basically impossible, actually.
could get what they wanted without an invasion? Well, it turns out it's much easier to conquer hearts and minds in an information war than to win with soldiers on the ground. And that might have something to do with Russia's influence campaign in the 2016 US presidential elections. See, after a 3-year investigation, a bipartisan US Senate committee recently concluded that Russia conducted an influence campaign to help Donald Trump get elected. If that's not shocking enough, the report states that Vladimir Putin himself ordered the hacking of Democratic Party emails to be leaked over WikiLeaks. The FBI now has a warrant out for 12 Russian military intelligence officers it believes interfered in the 2016 elections. So this is a serious incident.
From what I heard, okay, that was the case, right? But the more serious accusation was that it was a collusion. That means Trump colluded with Putin, which Democrats were pushing at the time, and that turned out to be a lie. So at the end of the day, I'm not doubting that Russia didn't have any influence on the election. I just don't think they sat down and said, okay, let's pick Trump. I just don't think so. Because at the end of the day, when Trump was the president, Putin didn't do anything. And when he wasn't the president, Putin did something. So I'm just saying, it's not a coincidence. I don't believe in coincidences. I just don't. I know people just feel like Trump is this bumbling idiot. But sometimes having someone unpredictable is actually the best thing to have, because lots of these leaders around the world, they respond to fear more than whatever the Biden is trying to do. They actually respond to fear more. Yeah. At the end of the day, the might of the United States is just too much. Nobody wants to fuck with the United States. Nobody. Nobody wants to do that. So it's in everybody's best interest to behave. But unfortunately, when you have a weak president like Biden is, I know some Biden fans or Democrats may not like this, but I don't know, even me sitting down from here, I can see it. Then talk more of the leaders in these other countries. But with Trump was unpredictable. I mean, could you imagine a US president being so unpresidential and threatening a world leader on Twitter that my button is bigger than yours? Like, almost like high school kids saying my penis is bigger than your penis. That's like, seriously, that was when he did that, then I was like, damn, this guy is crazy. But yeah, and I will tell you, that is so unpresidential. That is not something a president should be doing. But at the end of the day, it worked. It worked, and it works. Because at the end of the day, everybody knows the US has the bigger button. They have the bigger button. They are the big boys here. So if you have someone leading the United States that is so unpredictable, nobody knows what he could do next, people have to be very careful. But now with Biden, they all know that he won't act, so they can do whatever they can do whatever they want to do. But with Trump, you could not even predict that this guy could just sit down, bring that nuclear football. Like, you can't predict it. Like, it was so unpredictable, and that helped. That was why there was barely any wars around the world. Just saying.
He claims Russia tried to interfere again in 2020, though on a smaller scale. Whether Russia continues to meddle in US politics in the future or not, the damage may already be done as Americans increasingly report a loss of faith in democracy and government institutions.
Anyway, like I said during the video, a full-on invasion is impossible. Like, the United States is just so strong, just so powerful, just too geographically well placed. Like, there's nothing you can do. There's really nothing you can do. So the only thing that can actually happen is, like he said, influencing the election, maybe depending on who you want to be the president, which I don't really think, personally, I really don't understand why Putin would want Trump to be the president, because Trump is very unpredictable. So I wouldn't want someone that is unpredictable to be, if I'm Putin, I wouldn't want someone that is unpredictable to be the president of the United States. I would want someone that I expect and know what he's going to do at every point in time. That's just how I look at it, but it depends on who you talk to in the political aisle in the United States. The Democrats will feel like, oh, Putin and Trump share the bed together. Why Republicans will tell you that Putin fears and respects Trump. So I don't know. Anyone you want to believe, that is your decision. Then also, like, for example, like what I said with the assassination attempt on Trump, that is an easy way of starting a civil war in the United States. And I'm telling you, that would be brutal. That would be absolutely brutal. And if the civil war is Republicans versus Democrats, it's going to be a bloodbath. It's going to be a bloodbath. And you start seeing Democrats start identifying as Republicans in that situation. So, because I wonder how you're going to be able to know who is a Democrat and who is a Republican in that kind of war. How are you going to decide? I could have voted Democrats all my life. If that war starts, I'm going to tell you that I voted Republican. How are you going to prove it? I don't know. Whatever. So that's how I feel. I feel like that is the only way destroy it from within. And I actually believe that some seeds have already been planted. That is part of the reason why I don't think the US will last. The US as we know it will last past 200 years time. That is one of the reasons I don't think that they will. Anyway, let me know what you guys think down in the comments. I'd like to know what you think. Thank you guys for watching. See you on the next one. Peace.